Hi, I'm Isolde. They told me I was family only when they needed my paycheck for my sister's diamond-studded wedding, right after telling me college was too much for someone like me. They told me to pay $150,000 or get out. I chose get out, but they didn't know I was done being their silent, invisible ATM. Ever wonder what happens when the daughter they thought would stay quiet finally says no? Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever been pushed to the edge by family? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. I sat at the corner of that long, scratched-up dinner table, the one that still had heat rings from coffee cups no one bothered to use coasters for. The roast smelled burned, but Ophélie kept smiling, fluttering around with her apron tied too tight, like we were one big happy family. I knew something was wrong by the way Callista's eyes flicked over me, sizing up the cheap blouse I'd ironed that morning before work. Merrick cleared his throat, scraping his fork against his plate loud enough to make me flinch. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, looking me straight in the face. "Callista's wedding is coming up," he said like I didn't know. Callista's Instagram had been blasting photos of dress fittings and flower samples for months. It's going to be a beautiful day, but it needs to be done right. We're going to need a contribution. I didn't say anything. I just kept cutting into the overcooked meat, letting the silence drag. Callista leaned back in her chair, her shiny hair falling over her shoulders as she crossed her arms. "It's family, Izzy. Family takes care of family." Merrick cleared his throat again, leaning in. "We need $150,000. The knife slipped in my hand, clattering onto the plate. I could feel the heat crawl up my neck as the room got quiet, just the hum of the fridge filling the space. I thought back to that night when they told me college was not realistic, that they had other priorities. Callista's tuition, her apartment, her everything. I'd worked 2 jobs back then, coming home too tired to do more than shower and collapse on the mattress on the floor. Now they wanted me to fund her wedding. "It shouldn't be that hard for someone like you," Callista added, swirling her wine, not even looking at me. "You're always saying how well you're doing." I put the fork down, folding the napkin slowly, giving my hands something to do so they wouldn't shake. The air felt thick, heavy with the smell of burned gravy and too much expectation. I looked Merrick in the eyes, steady and clear. "No." It came out soft, but it hit the table like a dropped glass. Merrick's face turned red, the vein on his temple pulsing. Ophelie's fake smile cracked and she opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Callista let out a soft laugh, like it was a joke, taking another sip of wine. "What did you say?" Merrick's voice was low, dangerous. "No," I repeated, louder this time. Merrick's hand slammed down on the table, making the dishes jump. "You will pay that money, or you will get out of this house and never come back." Ophélie grabbed his arm, whispering something, but he shook her off, glaring at me with eyes that told me everything I needed to know about how this family saw me. I was just a wallet to them now, and if I wasn't that, I was nothing. Callista smirked, tilting her head. "Is that really the hill you want to die on, Izzy?" I stood up, smoothing down the front of my blouse, forcing my hands to stay steady. I picked up my purse, ignoring the pounding in my chest, ignoring the burn in my eyes. "I guess it is." I pushed in the chair quietly, the scrape of wood on tile the only sound as I turned and walked out of the kitchen, down the narrow hallway with the family pictures I wasn't in, past the door with the coat rack that still held my old jacket I'd outgrown years ago. The night air hit me like a slap, cold and sharp, clearing the tears before they could fall. I walked to my car, feeling the weight of it all settle on my shoulders, but also the strange lightness of finally saying no. I had nothing but the purse on my shoulder and the keys in my hand, but for the first time, it felt like it was enough. The car was cold when I climbed in, the seat stiff from the chill, and I sat there for a moment, breathing in the silence that was mine and mine alone. My phone buzzed, screen lighting up in the darkness, pulling me back into the moment. Unknown number. I swiped to read the message, the glow of the screen burning into my vision. "You think this is over?" I stared at it, the words pressing into me like a bruise, but I didn't look away. I stayed there in the car, the glow from that message still burning into my eyes while the cold air settled around me like an unwanted hug. I let the screen dim, locking the words away for now, but I couldn't lock away the memories they stirred up. My hand tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles pale as my mind dragged me back to that dinner last week. I thought it was just dinner. I was wrong. They called it a family dinner, in that cheerful voice Ophelie uses when she's baiting you to say yes before you know what you're agreeing to. I remember driving over after work, still in my blouse and slacks, hoping, stupidly, that maybe it was a step toward something better. Maybe they wanted to mend what they'd cracked so many times before. I walked in to find the table set with fancy plates, wine glasses catching the overhead light. Callista sat there with her perfect hair, phone in hand, taking photos of the table before even saying hi to me. Merrick was pouring wine like he was hosting some grand event, his face too eager, and Ophelie gave me that tight-lipped smile that never touched her eyes. They told me to sit. I did. It started normal enough. Talk about the weather, the neighborhood, Callista's social media numbers. But it didn't take long before Merrick leaned back, swirling his wine like he was the king of something, eyes locked on me. "I heard you're still living in that tiny place, Izzy," he said, loud enough to make Callista's eyes flicker with interest. "It's cozy," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Cozy," he repeated, chuckling. "You know, when you work at those discount companies, you can't expect much more, right?" Callista let out a laugh, soft and sharp. "Dad, be nice. She has her own place that's something." She shot me a smirk like she was handing me a participation trophy. Ophelie chimed in. "Callista's moving in with Thomas after the wedding. You know, a real home, not just a starter apartment." Thomas, sitting there in his button-down and trying to pretend he was part of this family, shifted uncomfortably. He gave me a small, apologetic glance, but it was gone before I could hold on to it. I looked down at the plate in front of me, the roast so dry it felt like dust in my mouth. Their laughter bounced around the walls, mixing with the clink of glasses and the scrape of knives on plates. They bragged about the wedding plans, about Thomas's family and their expectations, about how everyone will contribute to make it perfect. Everyone. I didn't say much. I sat there, eyes moving from face to face, taking in every smug smile, every dismissive shrug. I watched as Ophelie dabbed her lips with a napkin, one I recognized. Faith, embroidered in blue on the corner. I had given that to her one Christmas when I was 22, scraping together enough to buy a matching set, hoping she would see me as part of them if I tried hard enough. She never used them, until now. They laughed, talking about how some people just can't handle the kind of life Callista's meant for. They didn't say my name, but they didn't have to. My fork hovered over the plate, hands steady while my stomach twisted. I felt the heat in my chest, but I kept my face calm. Let them laugh, let them feel untouchable. I forced a smile, letting it sit on my lips like a mask, and excused myself as soon as the plates were cleared. Callista barely glanced up from her phone. Thomas mumbled something that might have been goodbye, and Merrick just grunted. Ophelie stood at the sink, washing that Faith napkin as I grabbed my coat, her back turned to me. I stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me with a soft click. The air was cold, crisp against my cheeks, grounding me as I walked to my car. The street was quiet, empty except for the sound of my boots on the pavement. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. The world felt still, waiting. I took a breath, letting it out slowly, watching it fog in the cold. "They have no idea what's coming," I whispered into the silence, letting the words settle in the air before turning the key and driving away. I sat in my car outside my building for a long time after that dinner, headlights from passing cars slicing across the windshield, the world moving while I stayed still. I could feel that message in my pocket like a stone, pressing into me even as I finally pushed open the car door and stepped into the cold night, letting the door close quietly behind me. The elevator ride up was silent, the floor numbers ticking by with a hum, and I let myself into my small apartment, the familiar scent of old wood and lavender candles meeting me in the dark. I dropped my keys into the bowl near the door, shrugged off my coat, and stood for a moment in the glow from the streetlights leaking through the blinds. My purse fell onto the kitchen table, the straps slipping through my fingers. I thought I was tired enough to sleep, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, city lights blinking outside, the hum of cars far below mixing with the memory that wouldn't leave me alone. They say family is supposed to lift you up, not bury you before you even begin. I was 18, holding an acceptance letter and shaking hands, the logo from the state university bold at the top, a partial scholarship printed neatly in the middle. My name, my future, finally something I could touch. Something that felt like mine. I remember the way my heart raced as I waited in the kitchen, clutching that letter so hard it creased, waiting for Merrick and Ophalie to come home. I remember Merrick walking in, smelling like coffee and stale diner grease, dropping his keys onto the counter, barely glancing at me. Ophalie followed, her makeup perfect, her perfume sharp in the air, her eyes moving over me before focusing on the groceries she set down. I got in, I managed to say, voice small but steady, holding out the letter like a peace offering. Merrick didn't take it. He glanced at it, then at me, with that half smirk that always made me feel like I was a child asking for something impossible. "College, huh?" he said, dropping into a chair. "You think you're ready for that?" Ophalie's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening as she turned to face me fully. "Isolde, let's be realistic. You're not exactly college material." Those words cut deeper than I expected, and I felt the heat rise in my face as I tried to explain about the scholarship, how it would cover part of it, how I could work part-time, how it was a chance. Merrick waved a hand, dismissing me like I was a nuisance. "No, Izzy, we're not going to start throwing money into some fantasy. You can get a job at the cafe, start saving. That's real life," Ophalie added, her tone so calm it made me feel stupid for hoping. "We don't believe in loans, Isolde. You'll end up in debt for a degree you won't use." They said it was about principle, about responsibility, about being practical. But later that year, I stood in the hallway, half hidden behind the wall, clutching that same letter, watching them throw a party for Callista when her acceptance letter came in. I remember the cake, tall and layered, the balloons, the music, the laughter as Merrick wiped a tear from his eye while telling everyone how proud he was. Ophalie gushed about how Callista would make something of herself, how the family savings had always been meant to help her start strong. I remember Callista's grin, her arm linked with Vera's, both of them posing for pictures in their matching dresses while I stood in the shadows, invisible, the edges of that letter digging into my palm until it nearly tore. They didn't even notice I was there, or if they did, they didn't care. That was the night I learned what family meant in that house. Back in the present, I lay on my bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as the memory played on a loop. The bitterness I had swallowed so many times hardened into something sharper, something that no longer felt like weakness. It felt like resolve. They never intended for me to have a future. I wasn't part of the plan, never was, but that didn't mean I couldn't build my own. I got up, feet cold against the floor, and crossed to the small box I kept in my closet, pulling it down carefully. Inside, beneath old photos and a few postcards I never mailed, lay that letter, still creased and yellowing, the ink faded but the words still clear. I ran my fingers over my name, letting the memories wash over me one last time before I whispered into the quiet, "You took my future once. Never again." I slipped the letter back into the box, closing it softly, feeling the weight of it settle, not as a burden, but as a reminder. They think they can take everything. They think they can decide who gets to dream and who doesn't. They're wrong. The morning after I held that old acceptance letter, I made myself coffee and let it go cold on the counter as I watched the sun crawl across the floor. There was a new steadiness in me, a quiet promise that I wouldn't let them take another piece of me again. I tidied up the apartment, washed the dishes, even folded the laundry I'd left in the basket for days, trying to create calm before the storm I felt was coming. It was Saturday afternoon when I sat down on my worn couch, scrolling through my phone to catch a moment of distraction. That was when I saw it. See, Callista's face beamed back at me from the screen, her perfect hair glowing under fairy lights strung across a backyard I recognized as Merrick and Ophalie's. A cake, layered with flowers, sat on a table, people raising glasses, laughing, hugging her. The caption was simple, "Forever starts now." My thumb hovered over the screen, the world around me fading as I scanned the photos. Merrick standing proudly beside Callista, Ophelie clutching Callista's hand, tears in her eyes, smiling wide. Even Vera was there in the background, standing off to the side, looking uncomfortable, but there. Everyone tagged. Everyone except me. I scrolled further, watching video clips of Callista's friends shouting, "Cheers to the bride!" Her fiancé, Thomas, kissed her cheek while people clapped and laughed. In the background, Ophelie's voice floated through, talking about how our family is so excited and how everyone pitched in to make this perfect. Everyone. The anger didn't come in a wave. It simmered, spreading through my chest like a quiet fire, burning steady and clear. They didn't even have the decency to tell me to my face that I wasn't wanted there. No call, no message, just a public display of their happiness while leaving me in the silence of my small apartment. I stared at the photos a moment longer, the laughter frozen in each image, before I pressed the call button on my phone, dialing Merrick's number. It rang twice before his voice came through, casual, almost bored. "What's up, Izzy?" I kept my voice calm. "You had a party." A pause, then a dismissive breath. "Oh, that? It was just a small thing for Callista. Nothing big." "Nothing big?" I repeated, keeping my tone level, though I could feel the heat rising under my skin. Ophelie's voice cut in as she took the phone. "Isolde, it would have been awkward for Callista's future in-laws if you were there. You understand, don't you?" My jaw tightened. "You didn't even think I should know?" "We didn't think you'd fit in," Merrick's voice returned, sharper now, the fake patience gone. "It was Callista's moment." I took a breath, gripping the phone tighter. "You expect me to fund your moments, but you won't even let me in the room." There was a silence, broken only by Ophelie's cold laugh. "This isn't about you, Izzy." And then Callista's voice joined in, bright and airy. "Don't make this about you, Izzy. It's my moment. You always make things difficult." I let the words sink in, feeling the familiar sting, but it didn't last. Instead, it was replaced by something stronger, steadier. "You're right," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. "If you don't think I belong in your celebrations, don't expect me to fund them." I could hear Merrick starting to shout, something about family duty and owing it to your sister, but I didn't listen. I ended the call, letting the silence of the apartment fill the space where their voices had been. For a moment, I stood there, phone still in my hand, feeling the rush of shaking adrenaline leave my body. I wasn't sure if I wanted to cry or laugh, but instead I sat back down on the couch, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My phone buzzed again, and for a second, I expected another call from them, another demand, another guilt trip. But it was a message from Vera. "Proud of you." They needed to hear that. I read it twice, letting the words settle over me like a warm blanket. A small, tired smile pulled at my lips as I placed the phone on the coffee table and leaned back. They wanted me to believe I was nothing without their approval, that I should be grateful for the scraps they threw my way while they built their lives on my silence. Not anymore. The message from Vera was still on my screen when I placed the phone down and stepped away, letting the words linger in the air around me. "Proud of you." I wasn't used to hearing that, especially not from anyone in my family. It felt like a small light in the dark, a reminder that standing up for myself didn't have to feel like a crime. Morning came early, the pale dawn slipping through the blinds as I stood by the window, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since lost its heat. The street was quiet, the world outside unaware of the battles people fought behind closed doors. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, and told myself today would be different. I pulled on a coat and grabbed my bag, deciding to make a quick run to the grocery store. The fridge was nearly empty, and I needed something normal to hold on to, something that didn't involve my family's demands or the constant feeling that I was always catching my breath around them. The grocery store was only a few blocks away, and the cold air helped clear the heaviness from my chest. I parked, stepped inside, and let the warm air and soft music wash over me, grabbing a cart and moving through the aisles with practiced ease. But as I moved toward the produce section, I started to notice the looks. A woman from church, Mrs. Langley, glanced at me, then quickly turned away, whispering to another woman near her. A man I'd known since high school, who usually nodded politely, kept his eyes fixed on the cereal boxes as I passed. Two teenagers standing near the bakery section snickered when they saw me, one of them pulling out a phone, pretending to scroll but clearly taking a photo. It started with whispers that turned into stares. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the list I'd made, but the weight of their eyes pressed against my skin. Each look another reminder that something was wrong. I moved faster, grabbing what I needed, forcing a neutral smile when someone caught my gaze, but the warmth I used to feel in this small community was gone, replaced with a coldness I couldn't explain. When I reached the checkout, I pulled out my phone to distract myself, to pretend I didn't see the way the cashier's smile faltered when she saw my face. That's when I saw the screenshots Vera had sent me. It was a post from Merrick. Some people forget what family means once they think they're too good for us, but God sees. It had been shared dozens of times. People commenting with praying hands, others with "so true" and "family is everything." Below it, Ophélie had commented, "We just wanted love and unity, but greed changes people." I could feel my pulse in my ears, the checkout scanners beeping syncing with the rush of blood. They were painting me as the villain while I was picking out milk and bread. They were telling everyone that I was ungrateful, that I had turned my back on them, that I was the reason for the fractures in our family. The cashier handed me my receipt without a word, eyes flicking to the phone in my hand, and I walked out, the automatic doors sliding closed behind me with a soft hiss that felt like a final sentence. Back in my car, I sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, the cold seeping into my fingers. I thought about calling someone, but who? The people I trusted were already few, and now even fewer would want to hear my side. I opened my contacts, hovered over a few names, then closed the app and drove home. When I got back to the apartment, I put the groceries away mechanically, the quiet of the space both comforting and crushing. My phone buzzed, and for a moment, I braced for another wave of accusations, but it was Vera. "Don't let them do this to you. You don't owe them your silence anymore." I read her message 3 times, the words sinking into the parts of me that still wanted to shrink back, to avoid conflict, to stay small so they wouldn't have another reason to hate me. But there was another part of me now, the part that had said no at that dinner table, the part that walked out without looking back. I slipped on a thicker jacket and stepped outside, the cold afternoon wind pushing against me as I walked down toward the Genesee River. The water moved steadily, reflecting the gray sky above, uncaring of the chaos in my small world. I found a bench and sat, pulling my coat tighter, breathing in the cold air. I thought about every birthday I'd spent waiting for them to remember, every holiday I'd spent trying to make things easier for them, every time I'd told myself it was enough to be in the background if it meant they would be happy. They wanted a scapegoat, and I had played that role for too long. As the wind bit at my cheeks, I let the anger move through me, not as something wild and uncontrollable, but as something clear and purposeful. They could call me greedy, they could call me ungrateful. Let them talk. When I was ready to speak, I would show them the truth. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and looked at myself for a moment, the reflection of a woman who was tired but not broken, a woman who was ready. Let them talk. I'll show them the truth. That thought anchored me as I closed the curtains against the dusk slipping into my living room. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound as I set down my phone, letting the silence remind me that for once, I was not scrambling to explain myself. I made tea, took a slow sip, and let the warmth center me while the streetlights flickered on outside. I had just settled into the evening quiet when a sharp knock rattled my door. Not a gentle neighborly tap, but the kind that makes your stomach tighten before your brain catches up. I set my mug down and walked over, looking through the peephole to see Merrick's face, set like stone, with Ophélie just behind him, lips pursed as if she'd bitten into something sour. I opened the door halfway. "What is it?" Merrick pushed the door wider without asking, stepping in like he owned the air in my apartment. Ophélie followed, her perfume too sweet, clinging to the small space like an accusation. "We need to talk like a family," Merrick said, glancing around, judging the furniture, the size of the room, the way people like him always do when they think you should feel ashamed for having less. Ophélie clasped her hands in front of her. "Callista's wedding planner needs the deposit by the end of the week, Isolde." They sat on my couch, uninvited, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to barge in and demand what they wanted. "And?" I leaned against the door, crossing my arms. Merrick's eyes narrowed. "You know how important this wedding is for Callista. It's not just about her, it's about all of us. Our family's reputation. We need you to step up and handle the deposit." I almost laughed. "You need me to pay for it, you mean?" Ophélie's face fell into her usual martyr expression. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" A memory hit me, sharp and sudden. The day I left for college, carrying my grandmother's worn-out suitcase, the only luggage I could afford, funded by the last of the money she left behind for me. Merrick and Ophélie didn't even say goodbye, didn't even come to the bus station. They told me it was a waste, that I would come crawling back. I never did. I snapped back to the present, watching Ophélie as she tried to squeeze out a tear, her hand clutching the armrest dramatically. "I don't owe you anything," I said quietly, letting the words settle in the room like dust. Merrick's face turned red, and he stood up, towering over me. "You think you're too good for us now, is that it? You think because you live in this—" He waved his hand around at my modest apartment. "That you're better than your family? Let me tell you something. You're nothing without us. And if you refuse to help, I have friends on the local business council. Don't think your job is safe if you go against your family." My heart beat hard, but my face stayed calm. "If you push me, you'll regret it." Ophélie gasped. "How dare you speak to your father like that?" "He's not my father," I replied, meeting Merrick's eyes for the first time without looking away. "And you're not my mother." For a second, the room was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the old clock above my sink. Then Merrick's hand came down hard on the back of my chair, rattling it. "You're going to regret this. We'll ruin your name in this town so fast you won't know what hit you." "Go ahead," I said, my voice calm, but inside, I felt something steel-like settle in my chest. "Get out of my apartment." Ophélie opened her mouth, but Merrick grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. He glared at me before yanking it open, the cold air rushing in as they stepped out, slamming it shut so hard the frame shook. I locked the door, resting my forehead against the wood, breathing deeply. They had crossed a line, and I could feel it, the invisible thread snapping between us for good. I turned, looking at my small living room, the soft glow of the lamp on the table, the tea now cold. I wasn't afraid anymore. They had come to collect what they thought was theirs, but they didn't realize I had nothing left to give them. As the wind outside rattled the window, I whispered to myself, "They just declared war. They just declared war." I let that truth settle in me as I made my coffee the next morning, the steam curling into the chilly air that seeped through the window cracks. The world outside looked the same, but everything had shifted. I was done playing their quiet victim. If they wanted a war, I was ready to give them one. After washing my cup, I slipped on my coat and locked the door, the familiar click grounding me as I walked down the steps of my building. The cold bit at my cheeks as I made my way to Vera's small law office downtown, each step steady, each breath reminding me that I wasn't going to let fear lead me anymore. Vera's office smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. She was waiting with a soft smile, waving me in as she closed the door behind us. Papers were neatly arranged on her desk, highlighted lines and sticky notes marking places like small flags of victory. "We've got them, Isolde," she said, her voice calm, but her eyes bright with a quiet fire. She handed me copies of bank transfers I'd forgotten about, screenshots of text messages from Ophélie, where she guilted me into sending money for Callista's emergencies. Receipts of payments I'd made when they promised they would pay me back, but never did. Every small betrayal that had felt like a paper cut at the time now bled into a pattern that Vera laid out on her desk like a roadmap of manipulation. I sat across from her, reading each piece, letting the weight of years settle into something solid in my chest. "They've been using me," I whispered. Vera nodded, adjusting her glasses. "They have, but not anymore." We talked strategy, not about lawsuits yet, but a clear message. Vera drafted a cease and desist letter, carefully worded, warning that any further slander would be met with legal action, and we prepared a timeline detailing every dollar I'd sent, every instance of their demands, every promise they broke. That afternoon, Vera posted a public statement on a local community Facebook page, the same one where they had tried to smear my name. She didn't use their names, but she didn't have to. It was clear enough for those who needed to see it. I sat beside her, watching as the post went live, my hands gripping the edge of the chair as the first comments rolled in. Some defended them, calling for family unity, but others, people who had seen me at church potlucks, who had worked with me at the library, who had once shaken my hand at community events, started to speak up. About time someone told the truth. I always wondered why Isolde wasn't at those family events. They should be ashamed. The comments piled up, some praising, some arguing, but for once, I wasn't alone in the shadows. My name was there, but not as a whispered accusation. It was part of a conversation I could finally face without flinching. My phone buzzed on the table, a text from Callista lighting up the screen. "You're ruining everything. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? To me?" I didn't respond. I placed the phone face down, refusing to let her tantrum pull me back into that cycle. I looked out Vera's window at the street below, people going about their lives, and felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to fix what wasn't mine to fix. Later that night, back in my apartment, I made tea and stood by the window, watching the glow of porch lights and passing headlights. I noticed the faith napkin sitting on my counter, the same one I had seen in Callista's engagement photos. It used to remind me of all the ways I wasn't enough for them, of every time I tried to earn love that wasn't there. Now, it was just a napkin, a piece of fabric that no longer had power over me. My phone buzzed again, and I picked it up. It was Vera. "They're scrambling now. You did it." I smiled, a small, quiet smile that felt like the first sunrise after a storm. I looked out at the lights of Rochester, breathing in deeply, the night air cool and alive. "It's not over yet," I said softly, not as a warning, but as a promise to myself. That thought carried me through the next morning as I fixed my hair in the small mirror by the door, tying it back with practiced hands. I grabbed the folder Vera prepared, pressing it to my chest for a moment, before sliding it into my bag. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the truth they'd twisted for so long. The late afternoon sun was dipping low by the time I parked near the local community hall. The lot was already filling, familiar faces from neighborhood walks and grocery store aisles mingling, some waving, some avoiding my eyes. I stepped out, breathing in the crisp evening air, and walked in. Inside, rows of folding chairs filled the room, the scent of brewed coffee and faint disinfectant hanging in the air. I spotted Vera near the back, giving me a nod, steady and reassuring, before returning to her quiet conversation with another woman I recognized from church. I took a seat in the middle, bag in my lap, my fingers drumming against the folder's edge. Merrick and Ophelia arrived with Callista trailing behind, her hair curled into perfect waves, her smile tight as she waved to people, letting out small laughs that sounded forced even across the room. Merrick's eyes swept the crowd before landing on me. He gave me a small nod that wasn't a greeting. It was a warning. The meeting started with the HOA president discussing upcoming repairs and dues, the typical chatter that filled these halls. I almost let myself get lulled into the routine, almost forgot why I was there until I saw Merrick shifting in his seat, clearing his throat before raising his hand. "If I may," he began, standing up, his voice slipping into that practiced tone he used when sweet-talking customers at his cafe, "I'd like to address a matter of community concern." Ophelie's face shifted into a mask of sorrow, her hand resting on her chest as she lowered her gaze, looking every bit the martyr she wanted them to see. Callista looked bored until she realized all eyes were on her father. Then she straightened her posture, lips twitching into a calculated smile. Merrick went on about family values and community integrity, weaving his narrative with practiced precision. Then he turned, gesturing toward me. "Some of you may not know, but our family has been dealing with betrayal," he said, letting the word hang in the air, pulling gasps from a few people. "We've tried to handle it privately, but when someone you've raised chooses to abandon family duty..." I felt my pulse quicken, but I remembered Vera's advice. Let them talk. "She has taken resources meant for family needs and turned her back on us when we needed her most," he continued, Ophelie dabbing fake tears with a tissue, shaking her head like a wounded saint. Callista's eyes glittered as she scanned the room, seeking sympathy, leaning toward a woman in the front row, whispering loud enough for me to hear. "She's always been like this. They thought they could shame me into silence." I stood up slowly, drawing in a steady breath as every head turned. I felt the tremor in my hands ease as I pulled the folder from my bag, setting it on the table in front of me. "May I speak?" The HOA president looked between me and Merrick, then nodded. "Go ahead, Isolde." I opened the folder, pulling out the papers, each one a testament to every lie they'd spun. I read aloud receipts of the money I sent, the text messages where they demanded more, the promises they broke about repaying me, the notes from scholarships I had earned, denied because family needed me elsewhere. I heard whispers ripple through the room, some people shifting in their seats, others folding their arms as they glanced at Merrick and Ophelie, their practiced innocence cracking. Then I reached into my pocket and unfolded the small faith napkin, holding it up for them all to see. "This was given to my stepmother years ago, a gift I bought when I still believed I could earn a place in their hearts," I said, my voice even, but firm. Even something as small as this became another tool they used to remind me I was never enough. Callista shot up, her face red, her composure fracturing. "You're ruining everything, Izzy. Do you know how pathetic this looks?" I turned to her, keeping my voice low but steady. "You have taken enough from me. I will not pay to be part of a family that never wanted me." I placed the napkin on the table gently, the room silent except for the sound of Callista's angry breaths and Ophelie's quiet sobs that now seemed hollow in the heavy air. Then I walked out, my shoes echoing on the linoleum floor, each step a release of years spent trying to prove I was worthy of them. Outside, the cold wrapped around me, but it felt like clarity, not punishment. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, the screen glowing in the dark parking lot. It was Vera. "You did it. They're done." I looked up at the night sky, the stars faint but present, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Vera's message glowed on my screen in the pre-dawn quiet, and for a moment I just stared, letting the stillness hold me. I set the phone down, wrapping my hands around the warmth of my coffee mug, the steam curling into the soft morning light filtering through my kitchen window. I didn't smile, not in the way people expect you to when they say you've won. It wasn't a victory parade or a grand explosion of joy. It was the kind of freedom that comes in hushed breaths, in the slow unclenching of muscles you didn't know you'd been holding tight for so many years. Word had spread after the HOA meeting. Rochester is a small city when it comes to whispers. Merrick's cafe, once bustling with locals eager to grab a scone and a coffee, was quieter now, with people crossing the street or choosing the place down the block. Ophelie's tight circle of friends suddenly found themselves too busy to meet for brunch, too occupied to return calls. And Callista. Callista's wedding plans started to unravel like a ribbon caught in a storm. Thomas's family, after seeing the truth, pulled back, asking questions Callista couldn't answer with her usual polished laugh and soft lies. Her perfect world, built on the backs of everyone else, was finally showing cracks. I didn't hear from them. No apology, no message demanding forgiveness, no angry calls accusing me of ruining everything. Just silence. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need their words to close this chapter. I didn't need them to see me, to validate the years I had given, the sacrifices I had made, the tears I had hidden in grocery store parking lots, in bathroom stalls, in my pillow at night. Vera called mid-morning. I answered, letting her voice fill the space of my small apartment. "They've gone quiet," she said simply. The legal notice worked. They know if they keep spreading lies, we'll take them to court, and they can't afford that now. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers against the window pane, feeling the cold on my skin. Thank you, Vera, for standing by me. You were always stronger than you believed, she replied. You didn't need me to prove it, but I'm glad I was there to see it. After we hung up, I went to the counter where the faith napkin sat, folded neatly, waiting. I picked it up, feeling the soft fabric between my fingers, remembering the girl I had been when I bought it, thinking it would make me part of their world if I just gave enough, loved enough, bent enough. I tucked it into a donation box I'd prepared, along with clothes I no longer wore, books I had read during long, lonely nights, trying to understand what I had done wrong to deserve their rejection. It was time to let it go, to stop carrying pieces of them into a future they had no place in. Later that day, I walked down Main Street, the crisp air biting at my cheeks, and found myself standing in front of a small cafe with a notice for a financial literacy workshop pinned to the window. They were looking for volunteers to mentor young women, helping them understand budgeting, credit, and independence. I stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming, and asked for an application. The young woman behind the counter looked up with a smile, handing me a form. We'd love to have someone like you, she said. Someone like me. I held the paper tightly, the words sinking in. Not someone who was invisible, not someone who had to earn her worth through sacrifice and silence. Someone seen, someone valued, someone who could turn years of pain into a roadmap for others to find their own freedom. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner, turning on soft music as I cooked, letting the smells of garlic and rosemary fill the small space that had become my sanctuary. I ate by the window, watching as the sky shifted from orange to deep purple, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I thought about everything I had lost, and everything I had gained by choosing to stand up, to speak, to walk away. The wound was still there, a quiet ache reminding me that family can be the sharpest blade when it chooses to cut. But it was my scar now, not theirs to use against me. As I washed the dishes, I caught my reflection in the darkened window, and for a moment, I paused, really looking at the woman standing there. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that family dinner weeks ago, hoping for love that was never coming. She was someone who had learned that you could love people, wish them well, and still walk away to save yourself. I poured another cup of coffee and settled by the window, pulling a blanket around my shoulders as the cold pressed in, the sunrise just beginning to glow against the horizon, painting everything in soft gold. I kept my promise to myself, I whispered, feeling tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from the quiet relief that comes when you finally realize you are free. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible anymore.